Welcome back to another edition of Real Spiritual Talk Radio. I'm your host, Lamont Gates, once again bringing you the world of faith, metaphysicality, and spirituality. Today, my guest had a near-death experience and returned with a divine message. Joining me today, ladies and gentlemen, is near-death experiencer Mr. Frank Farr. Frank, welcome to Real Spiritual Talk Radio.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely glad to have you on. Now, Frank, before we get into your near-death experience, what I typically like to do with my guests is go backwards a little bit and delve into their religious or spiritual belief systems, if applicable. What was it that you believed in religiously or spiritually speaking prior to having your near-death experience?
Well, I grew up Baptist. My family was not... I can tell you, I don't remember ever going to church with my family, when the mom and dad, until after I got saved. They didn't go to church. As a child, I would only go to church because they gave you bubble gum if you rode the bus to church, and that's the only reason I went. And I went by myself. I didn't get saved until I was 32 years old, so it was I was a adult by then, or at least in body. I might have still been acting childish. I was in law enforcement for 37 years, and I didn't act like a Christian. But at 32, I got saved by our department chaplain. My department chaplain led me to Christ. I got saved. And I want to say that I was a better person then. I still wasn't what I would consider a good Christian. I would still go out drinking with my buddies. My wife, most Christian woman you would ever meet in your life, she stayed home. We had our daughter whenever I was 32, I believe. That really didn't change me that much. I was still going out. I considered myself a Christian. I believe in once saved, always saved. And I figured that was just it. I was saved. All I had to do now is wait my time here on earth, and then I'd go to heaven. And that lasted probably up until last year. Last year, before all this happened, my wife was still going to church, and I would go intermittently every few months. I did not go to the same church that she did. I was still going to a Baptist church. She was going to a non-denominational. And every few months I would go to my church, but she went every Sunday and every Wednesday, but I just wasn't that good of a Christian at that time.
So in other words, it sounds like you were fully immersed into your Christian faith at some point, and then you started to move backwards a little. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. I backslid. Like I said, I was a police officer, so it wasn't like I was out there committing crimes or doing illegal drugs or anything like that. But I was still drinking. The words coming out of my mouth were not what should be coming out. I love to fight. It was, like I said, I consider myself saved, but I just wasn't acting like a Christian.
Yes, well, very well understood. And it sounds like you had a concept, though, of the afterlife. Whether you were saved or acting like you were saved, you still had this idea that there was something after an individual passed away. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir. Through faith, I have always known there was a heaven. Even though I didn't follow the Bible, I knew the Bible was the Word of God, and that if He says there's a heaven, there's a heaven. And through faith, at that time, that's all I had was my faith. Through that, like most people, I knew there was a heaven. I knew there was a God. I knew, Jesus and the Holy Spirit. I knew all that. So yes, sir. I did believe in heaven.
And with that said, I think you went beyond your faith during your near-death experience and got more verification for this belief system. But before we get into your near-death experience, why don't you tell us what it was that led up to the near-death experience?
All right, on June the 17th, my wife and I went out to eat, and I had steak and scallops. Well, immediately whenever we left the restaurant, my stomach started bothering me. We went and bought a new washing machine. It sounds kind of stupid that you remember it, but we went and bought a new washing machine, and they were loading it. And I told my wife, I'm just not feeling good. So I drove home. It took about 15 minutes. And when we got home, I told her, I said, it's not supposed to rain tonight. I'm going to leave the washing machine in the truck. I just don't feel like unloading it. I said, I just don't feel good. So I went to bed. That was on a Saturday. On Sunday, I woke up and my stomach was really bothering me. So asked her to take me to urgent care. I thought I had food poisoning from those scallops. Went to urgent care. I told them what had happened. They gave me some medicine for nausea and some pain relief. Came home, and I think it was about 4 or 5 hours later, I still got the text. I sent my wife a text asking her if we could go to the hospital. And so we got to the hospital, and they did, CT scans and all the tests on Monday. And they said, you've got a fistula. And if you know what a fistula is, it's a hole that has developed in your colon. I had a disease called diverticulitis, which a lot of people I have found out have diverticulitis, and it caused some sort of little stones that just sort of worked their way and made a hole in my colon, and it was causing me to go septic. So they scheduled me that night, the 19th, for emergency surgery.
Now, going into this surgery, did you think to yourself, this is serious, or did you think, they'll do this and I'll probably be out shortly?
I believed I had something similar back in 2017 where I was in the hospital about 6 weeks. And I figured this was going to be about the same. It wasn't as serious that time. That time, I think I only had one surgery. Last year, like I said, my first surgery was actually June 20th. I wound up having 17 surgeries last year. So I figured I was going to have one surgery, be in the hospital for a few weeks. I was still in law enforcement at the time, and I thought, I'll be in here for a few weeks and take a couple weeks off, and I'll be back at work and everything will be fine. It didn't work out that way.
No, not at all. Now, tell us what happened when you went into surgery and how it ultimately triggered your near-death experience.
Well, whenever I went into surgery, nobody, including myself or my wife, knew that I was allergic to something called beta blockers. And from the research that I've done, beta blockers are something they give just about everybody during surgery. It kind of slows your blood pressure. It slows your blood down to where whenever they're operating on you, you're not bleeding as much. Well, nobody knew that I was allergic to them. And so they gave me beta blockers, and my heart, and I'll tell you this part, my heart stopped, I stopped breathing. They had to stop what they were doing in the middle of the surgery. Well, I don't think they'd actually started the surgery yet, but they had to stop preparing for the surgery, and the surgeons had to bring the crash cart in and perform life-saving measures on me.
So at this point, we're talking something much more serious because, like you said, you didn't know you were allergic to beta blocker. So now we have a problem. How did that transpire into you going into this otherworldly place? What was it you saw first?
Well, and I'll tell you, I'll tell you how this worked. Was I woke up, I didn't know none of this, of course. And I woke up from what I thought was my surgery. And of course, my wife was sitting there at my bedside. And whenever I felt that I could talk coherently and I knew what was going on, I told her, like I said, that was the most Christian woman you ever met. I wish you could have met her. But I looked over at her, and her name was Angela. And I said, Angela, I said, I woke up at one point, and I said, it was just total, the way I put it, void of light. It was just total darkness. I wasn't happy. I wasn't sad. I wasn't scared at all. I was just very peaceful. I mean, just extremely peaceful. There was nothing wrong. Everything was just fine. I mean, it wasn't great. It wasn't bad. It was just fine. And I looked down, and about 10 foot below me, I could see my body from my neck to my waist. And I knew it was my body. Now, if you know me, you know I'm scared of heights. So right now, if you try to pick me up 10 foot up in the air, there's going to be a fight going on because I'm going to be just all nervous. Well, I wasn't. I was just completely fine. And I heard a voice. And the voice, and this sounds kind of weird, but I heard the voice in my right ear. I knew it was God. But I knew God was above and to the left of me. Now, I did not see any lights. I didn't hear any singing, didn't see the flowers singing. Like I said, everything was black other than my body and that voice. And God told me, he goes, you've got to go back. Like I said, I was very peaceful. I was fine. I said, okay. I mean, I sat here and talked to God. And I said, okay, but I want to stay in this body. And I'm calling that body my spiritual body, what I was in at that time, looking at my physical body. And I said, but I want to stay in this body. And God said, now God had a deep voice, but I've heard deeper ones here on earth. It's sort of like, if you're old enough, I don't think you are, but the Oak Ridge Boys, they had somebody with a very deep voice. His was deeper than God's. And God said, no, you're going back in that body. And at that time, I started going lower and lower towards my physical body. And I argued with God. And I told him, I said, no, I'm going to stay in this body. And God said in that same tone, the same voice, no, you're going back in that body. He wasn't angry at me for arguing. He wasn't upset at me. His voice didn't change. Of course, God knew beforehand that I was going to argue. He just kept saying, no, you're going back in that body. And I kept getting lower and lower. And I think I argued with him about 4 or 5 times saying, no, I'm going to stay in this body. Right whenever I touched my physical body, I knew God was right. I needed to go back in that body. Imagine that, God being right. And, so God was right. And like I said, I touched my body. I knew he was right. Well, I got done telling my wife this, and I looked over at her, and she was crying. And that's whenever she told me, she said, well, Frank, during your surgery, you died for 2 minutes. Now, she was keeping up with my phone at the time, and she had the calendar. And in the calendar, it even says on June 20th, heart stopped for 2 minutes, 8 a.m. to something. And one point that I try to make to everybody is that I told her this before she told me that I died during surgery. Now, no wife would ever just come right out and say, hey, you died before you said anything. But, if she had came out and told me that, and then I told her the story, I could see people being skeptical and think I'm filling in the blanks, or I'm trying to make a story and trying to get my name out there, which I'm not. I mean, this is all for God here. And so I told her, she told me about that. And she said, whenever you get out of the hospital, I really want to talk to you about what happened. And of course, she and I never got the chance to do that.
Now, this is a very fascinating story because, as you just stated, your wife told you that your heart stopped for 2 minutes. Did the doctors ever convey to you that you died on the table during surgery?
Yes, sir. Dr. Russell Pruitt, who is a trauma surgeon specialist, something. He was the trauma surgeon on duty whenever I went in that day. He has since turned out to be an extremely good friend of mine. He has told me, I have read it in my medical records, in medical speak. Now, I don't speak the same language as doctors, but having him interpret it, and also some other people in his office that have become just awesome friends of mine. Yes, it's in my medical records. Dr. Pruitt has told me. Dr. Fluke, he wound up coming in my room later. I don't remember if it was the next day or later on that day. And he told me, he said, I never expected to see you alive again. I know there's always 2 trauma surgeons on duty, and if both of them aren't busy, they both work on the same patient. If they have 2 patients, then of course they're separated. But so I take it he was in there also. But yeah, the doctors have verified it. My medical records have verified it.
Yeah, and that's the verification a lot of near-death experience enthusiasts need or want or look for in a near-death experience to determine that this was indeed a case of clinical death. And if your doctors are telling it to you, and if they told your wife and your wife is explaining it to you, then I suppose that that's exactly what we had here. Now, you said when you woke up in this spiritual body, you said you woke up in a void of darkness. Just how dark was this?
Completely. I mean, it was just, it's hard to explain because I could see that it was dark. It's not like whenever you just cover your eyes up or something like that. I could see, but it was just void of any light whatsoever. And I don't know any other way to explain it. I could see around, and there just wasn't nothing there until I looked down, and that's whenever I could see the light on my body, like I said, from my neck to my waist. I wasn't able to see my head or my legs or anything like that.
So it sounds like you also had what's commonly described as an out-of-body experience, being above your physical body in an aerial position, looking down at your physical body and perhaps the surroundings around you. Then you say you heard a voice, and
Yes,
you
sir.
believe that this voice was the voice of God.
Yes, sir. I know it is. Don't ask me how, but I know it was the voice of God. There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever.
Now, many people also say when they have a near-death experience is that they have a knowing. They just know who they're looking at sometimes when they have someone in their visual space. In this case, you're saying you know that it was the voice of God talking to you in your right ear, was it?
Yes, sir. Even though, yes, sir, he spoke to me in my right ear, even though I know he was above and to the left of me, which makes no sense, but uh, that's the way I know it happened.
That will be a form of divinity, I guess, right? To be at the left of someone, but to be right in
Yes,
someone's right ear. Yeah.
yes, yes, sir.
And with that said, there was a conversation where you began to argue with God because it sounds like you were satisfied where you were. How peaceful and how well received did you feel while you were in this particular place versus here on planet Earth?
Well, I can tell you this. I mean, I know heaven is paradise. I mean, I know that. I know it's just perfect. And honestly, I can't wait to get there. I'm not suicidal, not going to try to speed things up, but I can't wait to get to heaven. And this place was not heaven, but I wouldn't mind staying there. That's how peaceful it was. Like I said, it wasn't happy. I wasn't happy. But I was not sad or scared or anything. It was just completely peaceful. And I felt the body that I was in, my spiritual body was just perfect. I mean, it's really, really hard to explain. I don't want to make anything up and, tell you something that isn't true. But this was just a very, very, there's no peace on earth like there was in this. I call it another realm. That's my word. I didn't make it to heaven. I made it to another realm, and that place was a lot better than earth. Even though there was nobody around other than God speaking to me, there was, even before he spoke to me when I was first woke up there, I was just so peaceful and so happy. I loved it there, and I just can't imagine what heaven will be like.
Yeah, and many times, many near-death experiencers find it difficult to convey or express, where they were or what they felt over there. It's a very ineffable, right? Right, hard to describe the peace that you are in because there's really probably nothing to compare that peace with here. I mean, you can get a great massage, but it's probably not going to feel like where you were.
No, sir. It's like I was telling you earlier. My Georgia Bulldogs won. I was happy as I could be. They won. There ain't no comparison to where I was at, and you can almost say that you're weightless, even though you don't feel it. You're just there, and you're peaceful. And I keep saying the word peaceful, and your viewers probably gonna get tired of me saying that, but that's the only emotion I had. That's the only feeling I had, was that I was peaceful, and it was nice.
Yeah, and that's actually a common word when people are in this void or are having an out of body experience. They just feel at ease with everything. They feel almost one with everything, and that just everything is just okay in the
Yes, sir.
world.
Yes, sir. Not even the world. I wasn't even thinking nothing about the world. I wasn't. Yeah, I've got a daughter at the time. Let's see, this was last year. She was at the time 21 years old. She was a senior at University of Georgia, and love her to death. Love my wife like you wouldn't believe. And I wasn't thinking about neither one of them. My mother's still alive. She'll be 88 this year. I wasn't even thinking about her. I wasn't thinking about anybody. It was just how peaceful I was. That's all. Now, maybe if I'd stayed longer, I might have been looking, but I don't think so. I think I was just so peaceful. It wasn't anything on earth was out of my mind.
You then go on to say that you began to argue with God because you were told it's not your time. You have to come back. What was that argument like? Like, were you saying why? Were you asking, what's the point? Were you demanding or were you more inquisitive?
I think I went back to cop mode, police mode. I was demanding. To me, it was my decision and nobody could change it. And I was going to do what I wanted to do. And I was telling him, no, I'll go back. I was agreeing, I'll go back, but I'm going back in this body. That's how comfortable I was in that body. I'll go back in this body, but not that one. And like I said, God didn't get mad at me for arguing. His voice never changed. His tone never changed. His words never changed. It was just, no, you're going back in that body. And every time I would argue with him, tell him, no, I'm going back in this body, or the spiritual body, He would just say, no, you're going back in that body. Those are the only words he ever said to me was, you have to go back and know you're going back in that body. Those are the only things he ever said to me, but he wasn't mad at me for arguing. Um, I think I've done enough in my life to where he could have been mad at me a million times before for probably worse things than arguing with him. And this was nothing to him. It was, sort of like he expected it. He knew I was going to argue, and uh,
Yeah.
that was
And
it.
yeah. And then when you woke from this after coming back into your body, immediately it sounds like the first person you told was your wife.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Yeah. A lot of near-death experiencers, when they come back from a near-death experience, they either do one or the other. And that is they tell someone immediately, they shout it to the rooftops, or they keep it in fear of thinking someone's going to believe that they're crazy. And in the past, many doctors have put people away in mental institutions after they described having a near-death experience.
Well, I'll tell you, that is something, and I think I told that to you in a message before. This. I don't want people to think I'm crazy. I am not crazy. Like I said, I was in law enforcement for 37 years plus. Took many psychologicals during that time. I mean, I'm not a crazy person. But no, and maybe getting ahead of myself. But I believe there was 3 reasons that God sent me back. Do you want me to get into that now?
Yes, because I do. In our discussion prior to this interview, I did recall reading something about a message you received or a reason why you came back, and it had something to do with your wife. Am I correct?
Well, that's one of the reasons.
Okay.
In my opinion, and I mean, one of the my feeling, and this is what I believe God had told me, is number one, I had to go back to share this message. If this message gets to one unbeliever and it plants a seed in them that one day leads them to Christ, then being called a nutcase or whatever anybody wants to call me is well worth it. We'll celebrate in heaven together. He wants me to get this message out to let people know that God is real. I have talked to him. I've argued with him. Through faith, I've always known there was a God. Now I've got an experience. I know there's a God. I know it. Also, to let people know there is a heaven. I didn't make it to heaven. I made it somewhere else. But through faith, I've always known there's a heaven. I went somewhere else. I know there's another place after that, and I can't wait to get there. Number 2 is I believe that God told me what my minuscule part in his plan is. He wouldn't let me remember it. I told you, but not your audience, my wife passed away on December 30th. And he wouldn't let me remember this part until after she passed away, because matter of fact, I know it would have confused me to no end if he had let me remember right away. He let me remember to make sure and tell people about this, and then he let me remember the 3rd part. But the part about my part in his plan, he made sure that it was after she passed before he let me remember it. And the 3rd reason is that, like I've told you, through faith, I've always known there's a heaven. The Bible says so. The Bible is the word of God. There is a heaven. But he knew then that my wife would pass away on December 30th at 3:08 p.m. from the flu of all things. And that I would need something besides my faith to know that Christian woman is in paradise. And so like I said, I spoke to God. I know there's a God. So if there is a God, that means his word is correct. And he says there's a heaven. So I know exactly where Angela Farr is at. And I praise him every day for taking her there.
And that is a pretty amazing account. In addition to what you actually experienced, the message itself, building up, giving you the faith, I guess you needed, or
Yes,
the
sir.
knowledge that you needed, so that when your wife was to pass away, you know where you've been, and you probably have a good indication where she's gone.
Yes, sir. That's exactly it. That is it. I have leaned on that for the last 8 months now, and it brings a lot of comfort that I know where she's at. There's not too many people I've ever met that I will say 100% is in heaven, but she's one of them that I know 100% where she's at. She's probably still hugging Christ's feet.
And with that said, I just want to go back to your statement of feeling like you were having a mental situation. There are millions of people who have these near-death experiences from all walks of life, from people who work in science industries, medical industries, lawyers, you name it. They've all had entertainers, celebrities. They've all had what you've had, a near-death experience, and it has nothing to do with your psychological process. It was an actual experience of its own. Now,
Yes, sir.
you mentioned the Bible and Jesus, and you talked about being saved in the top of the interview. How has this experience changed, if it changed, your religious view?
Well, sir, I mean, my actual view, I guess, I am more knowledgeable now, and that's because I have studied the Bible a lot more. I am a matter of fact, I'm now going to the church Angela went to, which is non-denominational. Nothing against the Baptists. Like I said, I grew up Baptist, was Baptist up until last year. I've just found that I think, just in my opinion, that a lot of religions have a lot right. And then every religion has some that's probably a little wrong. And so I'm going to this non-denominational, and I'm there every Sunday. Started going every Wednesday that we do it. We don't do it every Wednesday service. I believe it's the first and third Wednesday we go. It's a small church that I go to, and but I go to it. The pastors there are great. I study the Bible. Angela, before she passed, she would always post stuff on Facebook, some sort of a uplifting message from the Bible, or just a joke or something. She would always post something, and I have taken up her light on that. Every day I post something. I go through scriptures, find something that I feel that God is telling me to put out there for somebody, and it's another one of those things to where maybe if I plant the seed, that someday it will lead somebody to Christ. I still tag her in the post because I'm not friends with everybody that she was friends with on Facebook, and so I'm hoping it's reaching more people to where that way, if somebody sees it, like I said, it'll lead them to Christ, and we'll celebrate in heaven together.
Now, my question to you, attending this particular non-denominational church, have you ever communicated to anyone there about your near-death experience? And if so, what was their reaction?
I believe, let's see, I'm trying to think. I believe I did tell the pastor about it whenever I first went there, because before I attended, I wanted to meet with the pastor and talk about some things, and I believe I told him that. Nobody's ever said anything about it. Um, if anybody ever, matter of fact, I'm going to tell them about this, and if they watch it and they want to talk about it, I'll be more than happy. Whenever Now this has nothing to do with my church, but before I got out of the hospital, my wife and I decided that I would medically retire. I just couldn't do it anymore, and I was in a wheelchair then, had a ostomy bag. I mean, it was terrible. Well, after she passed, my health increased 1,000%. I went from one day being in that chair to, after I got the bag removed, to where I was outside being able to do stuff in the yard. So I was working for a sheriff, and I went to meet with him, and I had the sheriff there, the colonel, a major, and a captain in the room. And most of these were friends of mine already, but I told them about this. And I was taking a chance that the sheriff wouldn't think I was a nutcase. And those men are believers, and they hired me back, put me in a position where I didn't have to. My surgeons were not for me going back to work, as a matter of fact, but they put me in a position as an instructor. I didn't have to deal with inmates or the public or anything like that. All I did was teach law enforcement classes. Then I wound up having some more medical problems, so I'm medically retired again. But I share this message anytime anybody wants to talk about it.
So it's instilled something in you that's giving you a lot more confidence as well.
Oh, yes, sir. 2 years ago, if you told me I'd be talking on your podcast, I would have told you you're crazy. There is no way that I could sit here and talk about something. I would be hiding in another room. But once it comes to God now, I'll talk to anybody that wants to talk to me.
And I'm very glad that you did come on and share your account. And with that said, Frank, I want to thank you for coming on Real Spiritual Talk Radio and sharing with us that absolutely fascinating near-death experience story.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gates. I really do appreciate it. You've been great, and I appreciate you letting me come on, sir.
Absolutely no problem at all. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Frank Farr.